Because any shooter and looter that I know, any sniper I know, or even just a person, not necessarily a sniper, just somebody trying to get a well aimed shot off, has been there where you're like, okay, here we go. And then something happens, something moves, you lose your footing, you lose your balance. And that's the reality of, I'll say it, this is combat. We're talking about combat here. Rounds are being fired both ways. Real things happen. It's not, people watch too much TV.
All right, we are joined today by Lynn Westover. I just released a video recently about the Trump assassination attempt. And on this video, I brought on two experts to discuss it, one of whom was Thomas Pecora, who ran as a security officer for the CIA, as well as Gavin Stone, who has done military work and espionage work, etc., for the British government, to get a perspective from the Secret Service side of what might be going on. But today I have the privilege to talk with someone who can give a perspective from the shooting side, if you will, not only of the shooter themselves, not to compliment or compare. It's a matter of just what is the mindset, the strategy, and how do you deal with it, as well as the Secret Service snipers who are involved. His name is Lynn Westover. He has served multiple tours overseas in multiple deserts in trying circumstances. How are you doing today, Lynn?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you, Eric. It's been a minute. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, it has been a minute. Lynn and I actually have hung out. We've tipped back a few beers, and he's a great guy. He actually is married to Allison Morrow, who I've done numerous shows with and is a friend. And I'm so thankful to have friends like Lynn who can come on and set me straight. I want to address, though, before I get any deeper into it, comments that came up from the previous show I did.
Mm-hmm.
This is YouTube, and I like to think of all of these as a conversation. So when I put out a show and discuss a topic, I get a lot of comments back. I do read the comments, and I look for things that I could have missed, I could improve on, etc. And there were two main comments that came up multiple times that I want to address right now about what I put out. The first critique is, when I put out the video, I did it in a manner where we all watched what happened, then described it afterward, and deleted or cut out the actual incident. This is because of YouTube standards and something that I've had to fight with for a long time. If you show any kind of violence, you are at risk of a video being demonetized, removed, or even blocked, and ultimately struck from the channel, which puts me at risk for not being able to upload it for a week or more. This is a video that is everywhere. I protested it to YouTube and Team YouTube, and I showed them at least a dozen copies of that exact same clip on many different channels on YouTube, like the Young Turks and others, to no avail. Didn't matter. Then people pointed out, well, what about the Zapruder film? This is obvious history. Guess what? I have put out the Zapruder film on videos to have the channel or the video demonetized. So it's not like I'm being silly or ridiculous. It's YouTube.
It's not you, it's me. It's YouTube's version of "It's not you, it's me." Because I mean,
Yeah.
I if you're, if it wasn't Eric Hunley, if it was like, oh, I don't know, Fox News or CNN or Al Jazeera or something like that was in the name, then it would be totally different. And we all know this. And I think you make a great point, Eric. And that's even for me, like, obviously yesterday I had a conversation as well with Viva and Barnes, and
Mm-hmm.
it is very difficult when you're getting on as a, subject matter expert in a specific topic, and you're on the fly trying to, okay, how do I make this digestible for the average person without using too much jargon, too much technical information, while at the same time giving enough information where people feel like they get some value out of it. And then also being mindful of the fact, like my job when I was a scout sniper, there were things that I did and had to do. And just as being a general, military member, and then moving on to civilian work as executive protection and so on and so forth, I have to be very careful myself on what I talk about on these platforms, because I risk either defaming myself because something gets taken out of context, or,
Mhm.
somebody like yourself who brings me on gets copyright strike. I mean,
But one quick point on when you brought up all the networks, Fox, CNN, et cetera. Part of the reason that Fox, CNN, et cetera, have a pass is that they are not only content creators, but they are in fact advertisers. So if you really break it down, who is YouTube's customer? It's not you, the viewer. It is the advertiser that pays the money. So when MSNBC, NBC, all these networks pay to advertise on YouTube, they are the customers. They have a bit more latitude. It's reality. But moving to the second thing, the second criticism that I saw multiple times was about Tom not specifically stating or answering my question directly as to whether personnel should have been stationed on the roof of the
yeah,
building in question that the shooter ultimately perished.
right.
Now, Tom made it a point to say, I will not talk about specific tactics, etc., but things have to be checked out. And I pushed back at him and I said, is this one of those things that had to be checked out? And he said yes. So in my opinion, I did get the question answered, maybe not as thoroughly as people like, but consider for a second, if he was to reveal, yes, as a matter of fact, there should have been a personnel stationed on the roof, in the future, some maniac could use this information and harm somebody because they have more information to devise a better plan.
Oh
So
yeah.
I understand him being circumspect, and I'm going to turn that to Lynn. Am I correct in my assessment there?
Oh, absolutely. And in one breath, I would be willing to say, like, yeah, that's an aspect of it. But on the flip side of it, you have things like methods and means, and you have to be very careful. And I can even point to a specific case of, uh, many people probably won't remember this, but this was a real thing that we dealt with, from roughly about 2005 to 2008, was a thing called the Juba sniper in Iraq. And they thought it was this 12-foot tall Dolph Lundgren looking dude who was a Chechen guy, the dragon tattoo on his arm. He's taking 1,200-meter shots with the dragon off. And the reality of it was it was a whole sniper brigade. They were coming in very close, similar to like what this shooter did with the Trump attempt. And that people watch too much TV, number one. And number two, even the Juba snipers came out and they said, hey, thank you, Major John Plaster, because he wrote a book called The Ultimate Sniper. They used that. They used the media coverage of the DC snipers to formulate their modus operandi on how they were being very effective at targeting US military members. And they didn't have to be a super uber duper, you know, Mark Wahlberg shooter, from the book of Point of Impact, like kind of guy, like a Tom Berenger taking these shots at 1,200 meters. They were taking the shots between, 200 meters and in. So yes, you have to be very careful with that. Um, and I understand that people are very thirsty for knowledge, and then when they don't feel satiated by somebody coming on and either, you know there's also the confirmation bias thing of it, like, right, like I want to hear this individual come on here and give credence to what my thoughts or fears or expectations are, and then when people don't get that, yeah, they get frustrated. But hey, you know what, it's YouTube, you're getting it for free, so take what you can get, I guess. but we have to
True
be
enough.
careful with
Now,
that stuff.
yeah, definitely. Now, on that note, to pivot immediately into the content, because I don't want to talk too much about how the sausage is being made. One of the things I want to jump right into with you, because we've talked about this offline, is we had some speculation about the Secret Service snipers who were on the roof and what could have been going on there. They may have been sighting over the location that the shooter was actually laying at the time because of the scopes, and that the one sniper who was kind of up on his knee broke a seal from the scope, and you need that seal with the scope to actually be making the shot. Um, and that timing could be off to such a degree that both those snipers may not have taken a shot. I have another question in there too. I'm sort of confused as to why there's two people with a rifle pointed, but not an obvious spotter. You know, it's like there's two snipers but no spotter, and I've always been under the impression that you have a sniper and a spotter, kind of like buddies, taking care of each other. So can you break down what you saw in more details, because we don't understand you know, the nuance. Nobody I was talking to was a sniper there.
Yeah, and there's so I'll start with that. I'll start with the shooter spotter relationship. Um, Typically, doctrinally, what you would see is the spotter is actually usually the senior sniper. Reason being is that the spotter, or the thought process was, is that the spotter had the experience, the capability to do quick math, quick evaluation of the overall common tactical picture, and your spotter would have a 20 power spotting scope. So the
Now,
spotter could actually
parallax,
see.
let's go further.
Okay.
What's a
So
parallax?
so
That's
parallax is the relationship essentially between the target and the focal plane of the scope that you're looking through. So what would happen is, say like this was my target, here's the reticle of my scope, right? If we move the angle of the observer with that, you see how it appears the reticle moves in relation to the target. So when you set parallax,
hmm.
basically what you're trying to do is put the reticle on the same focal plane. Parallax gives the impression that, there's movement in the reticle when you move your eye, even though the weapon is stationary. So if you look on like a website, like you'll see when people go to Squarespace or other different website builders, and they have this function called parallax. That's where, as the site's scrolling up, there's a background that moves with it, and it has this kind of effect to it. So back in the day, we didn't have variable power scopes, and we didn't have the ability to adjust parallax on the fly. Those scopes that those shooters had, I couldn't say specifically. I saw a few photos, but I wasn't able to get a close enough look at the type of scope they had. But they looked very similar to like the Schmidt and Bender scopes that we most recently had in the Marine Corps. I don't know what they're running with now, but what those scopes allow you to do is you have the ability to adjust your elevation, adjust your windage, adjust that parallax. So if I'm taking shots at, say, 200 yards, I could set the
Hmm.
parallax so that it puts the focal plane of the reticle at what that focal plane for 200 yards would be. So you have multiple adjustments going on that scope, right? So you have to factor all those things in. Then you have to identify the fact of whether or not, hey, am I at some kind of high angle? So if am I doing angle cosine to be able to determine, because you could be shooting at such a steep angle, right? Where line of sight, say I'm like 80 yards away, but when you're looking at that triangle, the actual distance covered by the round is maybe much less than that, depending on the angle. Now, I don't think they were necessarily dealing with angle cosine in this particular case, but again, that's another factor that you have to factor in. So that's why that pair, the combination between the shooter and the spotter, is so important, because they problem solve together. They identify these issues. One of the last shots I took in Iraq was on a moving vehicle. My first shot, it was driving away from me at an angle. My first shot started at about 380 yards. My final shots, when I actually was able to get the vehicle stopped, final shots were somewhere around 640, 650, right? So that's, 6.5 football fields away. The only reason I even was able to make those shots was because my spotter was making adjustments for me as I was each shot was going. So he could see the vapor trail in my rounds. He could say, "Hey, hold 1 mil left, hold 1 mil right," whatever the case may be. Like, he could talk me on because you're doing at that point rapid. If you're shooting a bolt action rifle, you're doing rapid bolt manipulation. If you're shooting a semi-automatic rifle, you're dealing with the recoil, you're losing sight of your target, and then you're having to re-engage the target with your sights. So things like stock weld, eye relief, scope shadow, exit pupil, all those things come into play. What you started seeing now is, well, okay, both shooter and spotter were just go both carrying scopes, because now they're having these higher powered scopes on the rifles. And so you'd have your spotter on a different level of magnification than the shooter. So the spotter's still talking on the shooter, but now because the spotter is spotting through the scope on their rifle, they also have the ability to engage should things become, a little bit more kinetic. Would be, we were fortunate in the fact in this situation where there was only one shooter. Had there been multiple shooters, now
Mhm.
you have multiple target engagements, multiple unknown distances. Like, and that's why, going back to what was going on with these two guys that everybody could see, couldn't see the other ones that were there, but there were other ones that were there, and everybody's like kind of picking on them. And on one hand, I'll say, like, hey, if there was a failure in training, a failure in procedure, a failure in tactics, or a failure in just the mission planning, then yes, let's address that. But if you weren't there, you weren't there. And so I want to be very careful not to say, well, I shoulda, woulda, coulda in this situation, just based off of a snapshot in time of these two guys on a roof trying to problem solve in a non-standard shooting position. They had tripods up there, and yesterday, because I was sitting there thinking about it too, I saw him come up out of the scope. So he broke stock weld, got out of his scope.
Now,
At first,
one quick question: was he the spotter? The guy who broke off the scope, was he potentially the spotter? Like the other one might have been holding the position, and that guy, because you're saying both people could have the rifle, so one being the spotter, one not.
I couldn't speculate to that, but
Okay.
what I can speculate to and feel pretty confident in is in one of the videos was when you see the angle for the guy we're kind of focusing on right now, the guy who was to the left in what that camera video was
Mhm.
was pulling in the frame. He was a little higher up than the guy to the right. If you look at the angle of his weapon, he had dipped it way down, so that rooftop was a little bit lower than him, but that's a significant change in your shooting position, and it was obviously very non-standard for him. And then what that caused is when he did go to engage, it became unstable. More often than not, you don't always, when the time comes for you to have to take a shot, it's not always going to be in the best position in the world, and you just have to make it happen. What I initially saw, what I thought I saw, was him coming out of the scope and maybe trying to ascertain, like, okay, is my backdrop clear? Trying to get that bigger picture, because when you're zoomed in on that scope like that, even when you're using the bend-in aiming concept, which is I'm shooting with both eyes open, there's still a lot I'm missing. So you'll see where we'll come up out of the scope, we'll look over the top of our turrets. That's what we call the adjustment knob. So you have your elevation turret, which is right on top. You'll look over your turrets and ensure what it is you're looking at before you get back in the scope and start taking shots. You know, it's not always the best thing, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do. And then it looked with as quick as he was getting back into it, like obviously it became time for him to engage. What it also might have been, because the video I saw was a little bit grainy, but then I saw a photo later. There's a unit, and I won't get too much into the technical aspects of it, but there's a unit that a lot of snipers are using now. What it is it's a ballistics calculator, an electronic one that will sit right on top of your scope. And some of them, I mean, the technology is insane. With some of these ballistic calculators, you can have all your gun data. So all the shooting that you do, you pull data. You calculate everything from density, altitude, what the temperature is, what the barometer's sitting at, what type of load you're using, what type of, in other words, the rounds that you're using, all even the position of the sun in relation to you on your scope, that can all affect on where your round's going to impact. And all that information gets plugged into this computer. And then that thing is connected both between your watch and your Kestrel, which is a wind meter. And so you could pull all this data immediately. It plugs it into the computer, and then it has a laser rangefinder right on the top there. So wherever you put your scope, the laser rangefinder hits that, ranges it, and it'll give you your data right there. So what might have happened, what it could have been, was him looking up into that unit to ensure that we call it it's the dope behind the gun, not so much the dope on the gun. And it's a joke, but when we say dope, when I'm putting dope in my gun, I'm putting the actual elevation and windage adjustments necessary for me to make this shot go. When you're doing a cold bore shot, that's a very specific data compared to when your gun is warmed up. So you may actually have a different point of impact on that cold bore shot than you will have on your follow-on shots, because now you've warmed up the barrel and it changes the harmonics of the barrel whip and things like that. So I gave a brief explanation of like what the internal, external, and terminal ballistics are and how those things relate. But that could have been also what he was doing, was confirming that the dope on his gun was the dope that he needed to make that shot, because if he's going to start taking the shot, he wants the first shot to be the shot that's going to get it done. And so there's, I mean, like I said, I just wanted to give the poor guy the benefit of the doubt, because, okay,
Mhm.
like I said before, if you weren't there, you weren't there. There's a lot going on. I felt for him as soon as I saw the video and saw his tripod move when he started taking the shots. I was just like, because any shooter and looter that I know, any sniper I know, or even just a person, not necessarily a sniper, just somebody trying to get a well aimed shot off, has been there where you're like, okay, here we go. And then something happens, something moves, you lose your footing, you lose your balance. And that's the reality of, I'll say it, this is combat. We're talking about combat here. Rounds are being fired both ways. Real things happen. It's not, people watch too much TV. I couldn't imagine being on the EP team for Trump, because that is a guy that is like, he's, right, wrong, or indifferent. That's a guy who's, I'm not going to go hide away. I'm going to get out there. He presses the flesh with people.
Definitely, definitely. And okay, let's pivot to the other end of the scale, and that would be the shooter himself. And again, this is a kind of in flux. Like, we don't have all the information, and we probably won't have all the information for a while, because they have to collect all the evidence, figure things out. There's videos going around. There's a lot of speculation, things like that. A lot of things have been said about him, in terms of the shot, whether he was a terrible shot who could never make it to the rifle team, or he's a good shot, or whatever else.
Yeah, and what you can't account for is those last minute turns or looks or whatever the target does as you're in the middle, because depending on the range too, you have basically your latency as far as from when you make the decision to take the slack out till when the actual round breaks. And then also just some of those other things that occur. What we would do is you would basically set up a grid kind of overlay of whoever it is that your target is, right? And so even if my target may not be in the picture of that grid where my designated position was, I held that position, because at the second that shot breaks, individual can turn or things like that. Anybody who's been a hunter and gone hunting and tried to nail a deer or something like that, miss shots a lot because the animal moves right at the last second. So again, that can factor in for how that miss occurred, which, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the matter of even not even a whole degree, like segments of a degree, uh, could have totally had different outcomes for that. Then you add in the fact, I don't care who you are, I don't care how committed you are, your nerves are going to be impacting you. So getting into the psyche of this individual who's trying to take the shot, like as I mentioned, previously, he had to know that that was it for him. The chances of him egressing from this, I mean, is basically a cop at this point. So that gives you the idea of the level of commitment that this person felt, and whether or not, obviously there may be some mental health things going on there. I don't think anybody would be in their right mind to go and just want to kill somebody like that. So, uh, there's obviously those aspects of it, but that just tells you how committed this individual was. He shimmied up on a rooftop, he got within danger close, and he knew what it was he was about to do, and he went for it. So, and I don't know the veracity of if there was a cop that actually engaged with him or not, because that did come up. Um, I could speak to the fact that, okay, there's such a shock in that. Um, Human beings go through denial all the time. That's one of the first file folders we go through in a non-standard observation. I was not expecting that. Usually you'll hear the OMG or the no way. Or in this case, if that really did happen, the guy's like, holy crap, dude just pointed a gun at me. And your initial, doesn't matter how much training you've had, your initial gut reaction is going to be is like, crap, I just had a weapon system pointed at me. There is a
Now hold on.
level of latency there.
This is the perspective of the cop now.
Right.
We're addressing, right?
It's so,
Because
yeah, but
people are going to be critical, like, how dare you?
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
if a gun's pointed at you, you generally duck. I
right.
don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Right. And, again, it takes a lot of training. You'll even see, right, even the best shooters in the world, when they get into engagements, close engagements, the more often than not, where the first round impacts are in the hands and the arms. And the reason being is because when your functional field of view, the angle in which you view the world, which for us as human beings is very, very small, it's between 3 and 10 degrees, your functional field of view. So it's like about a quarter at arm's length. And you see gun. That's where your brain goes to. Gun, murder, death, kill, weapon. And what even the best shooters in the world, it takes a second, a couple rounds usually, for those rounds to walk to where it's supposed to go. I've trained, hey, right here in the main part of the body, maybe failure to stop drill to the head in the T box. Um, you'll see where those things get walked on. So yeah, you have two things happening at once. You have, if this is really what happened, this cop reacting to, holy crap, I wasn't expecting to see that. And then now you've got this guy who's, I'm here, I'm committed, I need to take the shots, and trying to get into position, trying to get stable, trying to take the shot, trying to overcome what it is that they're about to do. Yeah, that's a lot going on there. So that, you know, that I've seen a lot of first shots get missed because of the stress of the situation. And I think that's, one of the other things that got brought up. Some people saying, oh, there's no way possible that this 20-year-old kid and this, that, and the other. And it's like, I don't know. We got 18-year-old kids join the military with very basic marksmanship techniques, and they're taking shots to 5 times that distance. Granted, not as a stressful environment. Granted, it's on a range with no distance and things like that. But I think we're all dancing around a bush here. And one of the big questions that came up was like, okay, how could it get missed that this? I think that was one of the things that you mentioned is, why wasn't there a counter sniper on this rooftop? B, how is it that this guy managed to get there? Well, yeah, there's certainly
Mm-hmm.
there was a seam gap or somewhere. I think it's safe and fair to say that there was a seam and gap somewhere, and a ruthless opportunist will find those seams and gaps and use them to their advantage. What might explain why the guy got missed? Like, okay, from different angles, if other people were seeing it, like, oh yeah, clearly there's this dude climbing on the roof. But if those counter sniper teams had a different angle where they're only seeing so much of them, that can account for that. Additionally, like one of the things we used to do in the military when I was teaching for both the combat hunter programs, the advanced situational awareness training programs, the special operations forces training programs, and insider threat stuff, is I would take a group of soldiers or Marines out into a field and I'd put them online and I'd say, okay, hey, somewhere out in this field, there's a sniper. Find me the sniper. And more often than not, like 90% of the time, everybody would point to the one lone bush out in the middle of the field and they'd say, oh, I see a dark spot. There's a sniper there. And then
Mm-hmm.
I would say, okay, cool. Sniper, go ahead and stand. And then my sniper would stand up probably 20 feet away from them all. And they were like, oh, holy crap, the dude was right there. It's a mind game. Like you hear sniper, you think way out. Again, going back to the Juba sniper thing, like they were taking close shots and in. So it's hard to overcome that. You have that thought process. Then on top of that, most of us scan from left to right because we're used to reading from left to right. Well, there's sequencing that occurs within the brain, right? Your brain always is trying
Hmm.
to make order out of chaos. Then you have things like change blindness. That was one of the methods he used. He slowly got up on that roof. So if I don't see the movement, because we are attracted to movement as human beings, if I don't see that movement, that's the same way that a spider can crawl down its web next to my face and I miss it until I turn and I'm like, holy crap, there's a spider there. Um, but again, we still have yet to know like what exactly happened at Mandalay Bay. So on one hand, that kind of, we got to, I think it's good thing. I think it's good thing that people in general, the population is holding truth to power and saying, "Hey, okay, no, we want to, how on earth does this happen? You've got a former president who's also the main candidate front runner for this, and I think that's the thing that people are big screaming up and down, jumping on their own heads over. And I think that's a relevant and valid thing to be questioning. And then when we take the time to, in the aftermath, pick this thing apart, one of the other things I mentioned is when you have so much information and you've got all these other different people who think they saw something, or, it's after the fact, like, or if I see something on a video, well, now I can't unsee that. So my experience melds into that. There's a lot going on there too. So, as they would say in law enforcement and criminal justice, the worst kind of witness in the world is an eyewitness, because the reality of it is you don't see with your eyes, you see with your brain. Your brain tells you what you see, and then you formulate your reality based on that.
It should be very difficult, if not impossible, to for the shooter to wind up in the location he was in. I don't get details of what broke down, but that was definitely within a pretty narrow parameter. I think Don Bongino has talked about it. He was Secret Service, that there was a certain sphere or zone, and that was well within the zone, and would be a seemingly obvious good location for someone to take a shot.
He didn't wake up the morning of that and make that decision. So I don't know how far in advance that he knew where this was going to take place. And I'm not following Trump's schedule, so I don't know how far in advance you can. I'm sure you can find that out. A simple internet search would figure that out. My whole point to all
Sure.
of this is that there was some pre-planning involved in this. How much, I don't
Rehearsals,
know,
probably.
but a significant amount enough. He had to problem solve how he got up on that roof. He had to problem solve. He had to problem solve all these things, and he didn't just do it the day of. It, I mean, you could be good, but I don't think you're that good. So yeah, that's a big thing that I think we're all waiting with bated breath, is especially that kind of a weapon system too. Like a pistol, I could get. Pistol's a lot smaller, it's a little bit more easily concealed. But and maybe the thing is, going back to the example I gave about this, sniper in the open, is maybe once what could have most certainly happened is like, okay, we cleared this building and we feel that our, I'm using the royal we, that's the details, we of we feel that like we've mitigated that risk enough because of everything else that we have going on there. And I've made the point before, that's why SOPs are written in blood, because we didn't account for X, Y, or Z. Something happened, and now it's going to create a change. That, or as people have been saying, and I say rightfully so, you know, uh, an overall gross level of incompetence. You could get into the argument of whether it was willful or not. I'm sure those things will
Hmm.
come out. People are going to make their
Hmm.
speculations, but I don't think that changes the reality of what happened. And I think that's the
True.
thing that's, again, still so shocking to the conscious. I mean, when my father-in-law is the one who texted us and said, "Hey, you won't believe what just happened," and I found myself going back to September of 2011, when I'm getting, called back on the ship because airplanes just flew into the towers. And, I don't mean to make light of that as far as saying that this is on the same level as far as like the death and destruction in the loss there. I mean, let's not forget two
Mhm.
people were severely injured. One person lost his life exercising his First Amendment right to engage in politics. Nobody should be in that much fear of their own life that they can't feel comfortable enough to talk about what it is they think or believe, even though that's where we are getting at with the barometer here.
To wrap things up, I know there's so much we can go over, and there's just so much here. I always, I always try to finish the interview, and this is probably unfair, but what is the one question? And I know there's probably 20, but what is the one question that I should have asked you, but I did not ask you?
Just really driving into the point of when people are asking, well, how do these things occur, right? Going into some of the weeds on that stuff, though it may be boring for others, it's the reality of it is there's so much going on taking place there. And, I'm not saying
Right.
it's a pass. I'm not saying that this is something that should have ever happened, but it happened. So can we learn from it? Because I don't think we solve any problems either by like intentionally burning people down. Now, that being said, I think the questions that we're all going to be wanting to know answers to is what are the specifics? If there is smoke there, what was the fire type of deal? I think for people, people have an expectation for this kind of a cabal or some kind of conspiracy on how all this worked, and I've heard plenty of them. People asking me questions, like one of the crazy questions was, "Do you think that Trump could have somehow made this happen so that it made him look like the hero type of thing?" And I'm like, wow, that's that's a reach because that would mean you'd have to be willing
Mhm.
to put yourself in the line of fire. And I know some really good shooters, and I would not, under any circumstances, even with as good as these guys are that I know, be willing to let them from that range
No,
try to
no.
take a shot at my ear just so I could say like, look at that, I cheated death. So sometimes that's what I would say for the audience is, yeah, sometimes things are just what they are.
I'm going to address that right now. I 100% in my mind do not feel Trump or his camp were behind this in any way, shape, or form. And I'll give you another reason. Not only, the obvious of who the hell's going to stand there and let a bullet go by them, and how are you going to get the timing? How are you going to have a flow of speech with that, knowing, hey, anytime, even if it's a squib, or I'm going to have a squib go off. Come on. Other people also were hit. Go tell them that they didn't have a bullet. This man died. His
Yeah,
family knows that there was a bullet. That's insulting to them. Trump is not behind it. You know who else was not behind it? Biden was not behind it, in my opinion. And I'll give you the reasons why here. Trump is ahead right now. Biden had a disastrous debate performance. The Democratic Party is in flux. They're fighting amongst themselves, and Trump was had the upper hand. It would make no sense. On the flip side, how does it help Biden that you make somebody almost a martyr? It doesn't. It makes no sense whatsoever. So I think everybody needs to stop on those ends.
because could you imagine what, like, if that had actually happened, I couldn't even begin to think of what kind of chaos our country would go into because of that.
All right, well, this is perfect. I actually like to have you back in the future to discuss some of the training that you do because you train police departments and responses and literally the behavior of those around you. And but for now, Lynn, thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me on, and I'll go ahead and apologize to your audience now. I know I can kind of do like the runaway gun, pun intended, on this, talking about things. It's again when you're the guy in the moment and you're trying to distill information and hit certain points, and you're like, oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. Like in these longer formats, that is hard to do. And again, you can't please everybody, like you said. Like there's some people that want to hear it. There's other people that are just like, hey, just give me the facts. So hopefully, your audience members, some of 'em, they got something out of it. For those ones that didn't, or maybe didn't get the questions answered that they wanted answered, please engage with Eric in the comments or whatever. And he has direct comms with me. Be more than happy to whatever questions I can answer, I will. And I won't BS you if it's something that I don't know the answer to. I'll just say I don't know the answer to, because everybody can see through somebody selling wolf tickets right away.
Perfect. Thank you so much.